Hey, this is Rusty Kelly,
And this is Amelia McKay.
and this is technically the 5th episode of the Breathing Problem Productions podcast. I'm so stoked and excited that we're staying on this thing. We're keeping at it,
There's no going back.
So this episode is going to be dedicated to the Concave Convex album Victory Over Body, which Amelia and I were talking about how to us okay, so if we were talking about our favorite albums, and if we, in terms of albums we've made, if we define kind of favorite as that album being successful and what we wanted it to sound like, obviously Bed of Sex is up there, and we talked about that one. And then now we wanted to talk about, the one that's probably tied or second, however you define it, right?
Right.
And I guess this album, Concave Convex, for people that don't know, is Amelia and I, just like Breathing Problem is. We call these projects in-house Breathing Problem Productions podcasts, and that they are just the two people that run BPP. And I think this album, like I said before, is one of those albums where the things just came together in a way where everything kind of clicked. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was like an enormous amount of content that we could choose from, that we, had this real ear for and eye for.
Yes. I think, the one thing about this album is that it came from Amelia going through hours of various documentaries about not just the Larry Nassar or Dominique Monaco gym stuff, but also just the history of gymnastics in general.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of the loops and samples that we used, instead of something obvious like using synthesizers, of which we used those two in drum machines or contact mics, there was also a lot of use of cutting up those various documentaries of live gym footage or other strange sounds and using them. So I think, but I guess maybe I'm ahead of myself. I wanted to just touch base a little bit on how Concave Convex started, which the first Concave Convex album is it's actually untitled. It's this one. Amelia and I just were talking about different names for different projects, and we decided on the name Concave Convex. And one thing I think that is interesting is Amelia had found this sample of Kylie Jenner talking about pre-surgeries. I think it's a completely pre-surgery Kylie picture, right? It's a picture, it's a video of Kylie saying how,
and like on Instagram, it's like automatically like a looped video. So
right, where she's like saying, you may not like the way I look, or
you may not like my jawline, my eyes may be too big for you, and my lips may be too small, but I love the way that I look, and so should you.
Yeah, she says, I love the way I was made.
Yeah.
And so should you. And if you want to hear this track, it's on our Bandcamp. It's called Reveal the Skin Inside My Mouth. And I think we had just been going back and forth on ideas for a project that was specifically related to, I guess, the human body and body dysmorphia and social media, that felt like it kind of existed outside of Breathing Problem or Interior One,
Yeah.
And it was finding that loop, which, is obviously an amazing ironic thing, because of course Kylie is well known for getting major surgeries in order for her to essentially become hugely popular and famous. And for a while, you could argue she eclipsed Kim Kardashian in popularity in terms of who was the most famous Kardashian Jenner. I would say Kim is maybe back to being number one, maybe. That's my argument, But
yeah, it's true. There's a lot of people that still like look at her as like the, you know, the most beautiful one, or like the, you know,
the most popular.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kylie, of course, has become very guarded and only shows very controlled side of her. Where, not that Kim doesn't, but Kim's a little more, I don't know, she seems like she takes things a little less seriously. Amelia and I could talk about the Kardashians all day, but needless to say, I think it's incredible the way that Kylie essentially gets these surgeries. She gets her lips, she keeps saying she got filler, but she got a lip lift. She got, she had no lips, then she gets lips. She gets many other surgeries as time goes on. And essentially what the culture and social media does is completely reward her and says, yeah, you were the ugly one, and now you're fucking sexy and beautiful and interesting. Right. And she becomes the most popular Kardashian / Jenner. And she's, there, in the 90s, there was all this shit about, like, I'm a man saying this, but this is my understanding of, do fashion magazines make women anorexic? As if it's much more complicated than that. But
yeah.
But like, in the very least, that shallow kind of statement becomes completely, in a way, true, in the sense that, like, Kylie was just showered. If there was an award for you're the greatest girl in the world, she was given it at that moment. And
people still back that for sure, and they like make posts that are like, well, people are just super mad that she didn't like the way she looked, and so she had enough money to like fix it.
Yeah, that Kylie, you're just jealous of Kylie, you're just jealous of Kim's wealth, you're just jealous that Kylie's beautiful. And now I would say Kylie's botched. She has so much filler.
It's like the Photoshop that's involved with those pictures.
Well,
it's like you might as well not have surgery because she doesn't really look that great just without.
No, I mean, filter. How old is Kylie? Is she 97? Or no?
I think she's like 22 or 23. Yeah,
I guess we could just look. But Kylie looks like, well, however old she is, she's like in her early to mid 20s. She looks, I would say, like a 40-something woman with bad plastic surgery. And by the way, I know I come off as being really weird and bitchy. I'm a bitchy straight guy, but I grew up with a single mom, and she had bought tons and tons of National Enquirers. She loved Princess Diana. She loved Elizabeth Taylor. She loved talking about, gossip and, for lack of a better word, and the media. That was pre-social media, I guess. And so I don't think I'm special, but I'm the straight guy that is 100% plugged into that world. Maybe Concave Convex is a reflection of my interest in what culture would define as what is the interests of women, or women and gay men. I know I'm being very generalizing and broad, but needless to say, this first Concave Convex album utilizes the Kylie clip. It utilizes other social media people that are not very popular, but they were people that were talking about having issues with eating disorders. And then also we used the sample of the two twin girls, the Abby and Brittany, who are basically, to the naked eye, it looked like it's a two-headed girl, essentially, the way it looks. And, this podcast isn't about that first tape, but feel free to listen to it. And it's one that I really love. I think I'll be mentioning this a lot, but this isn't, I guess these tapes aren't just some indictment of social media is bad and all plastic surgery is bad. And eating disorders are just really simple. Girls just need to stop having them. Of course, that's not what these things are about. They're about how complex and multifaceted
psychological and emotional.
Right, and the way that I think our culture and the media play around with people's interests in different shallow, simplistic ways, but it's all so much more broad and deep. And I mean that in the sense of like it's like a deep pool, a deep ocean of which there's so many layers. The second tape is the Sex Surrogate Tape, which we could do it. Maybe we will do an episode about it someday. But it was about the Annabelle Chong case, and
It's Sex Surrogate. It's a documentary.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an amazing documentary. The tape's basically one side is kind of about Annabelle. The other side is about
Maureen.
Right. Her name was Maureen. She was what's called a sex surrogate. And I don't know if this exists anymore, but it was like an experimental field of essentially counselors or psychologists, some that had degrees, some that didn't, that essentially used literal sex as a healing mechanism for people that maybe couldn't. It was all theoretical, like who knows if any of this stuff worked, but it would be like, say, a man who was afraid, who hadn't had any partners, maybe what we define as an incel, whatever the fuck that means, but or a weirdo autistic guy, and she would use sex to try to heal him, to make him quote unquote normal again. Or men that or older men that weren't getting sex from their wives,
or they had erectile dysfunction,
right? And you can do a lot of reading about this sex surrogacy theory stuff. It wasn't like taught in schools or anything, but I think there was a handful, maybe more, of people that tried this, and in many ways it was a mix of like sex work and new age psychology and stuff. In many ways it didn't work, and it doesn't work.
And
but
in the documentary, that's like
very apparent.
Yeah.
And so there's an amazing documentary that I think you can easily find on Amazon. It might even be streaming on Amazon Prime by a director named Kirby Dick, called Sex Surrogate. It's really cool because it's shot on a very early VHS, I believe, like early video camera type thing. That documentarian later did the documentary Sick about the
Bob Flanagan.
Yeah, about the S&M artist Bob Flanagan, which is a movie both Amelia and I are deeply connected to. Maybe we'll do an episode someday about that movie. But needless to say, I had heard about the documentary, and a couple years ago, the writer Peter Sotos sent me and Amelia a box of films, like DVDs, tons of like really great documentaries. Some I had seen and some I hadn't, specifically this Sex Surrogate documentary. So it was like a very nice thing. I know I'm side bragging, but he's an amazing, incredible artist, and he did a very kind thing in sending, documentaries and stuff that we could use and see, stuff that was clearly from, cited in bibliographies of his own work. And he also sent lots of books that are all around us in our house that we use as reference material all the time. But that tape, I think, was a step up even more. Of course, Annabelle Chong's documentary Sex is a hugely important documentary to Amelia and me. Do you want to talk about why you're interested in Annabelle Chong? Or
sure, yeah. She was like a college student, and as a young adult moved to LA, chose to go into the porn industry
while being, I think she was majoring, maybe it was I think it was like graduate school, UCLA,
right.
And she was doing a feminist studies thing, right?
And her pornography became a part of her study,
right,
as like being her own subject.
This was her, I don't know if she ever finished it, but this was her kind of claim of like, this was the 90s UCLA. We had gotten, feminism had gotten into, I guess what you define the third wave, which is a lot of sex positive feminists like Susie Bright and others who were saying like all this negativity that Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon about how pornography is bad and sex work is dangerous and hurtful to women. That's total bullshit. This is beautiful, incredible stuff. And I realize that's kind of a broad generalization of those third wave feminist work, but needless to say, Annabelle was in the mindset that sex work could be a very empowering, invigorating thing.
Right. And in the process, she kind of has to reconcile all these different internal battles going on, which makes it like really interesting to watch, even though it's like so bleak and hard to watch.
Right, because the documentary becomes it's not as simple as like, well, she gets into the porn industry and she gets spit out. I mean, that does happen in some ways, but there's a couple different layers of things going on that are so interesting.
The impacts of these acts that she did are written off in an intellectual way as being something that is like this enlightened thing.
Right.
But all the while, they are like tormenting her and tearing
super
her
damaging.
apart in this real damaging way. And
she's being completely exploited. I mean, if you guys have watched it, you know, for the people that don't know, Annabelle Chong did what was called the world's biggest gangbang. I don't know if it really was the biggest at the time. It was beaten later on, but we find out later she wasn't even paid for it. I think she was maybe given a little money at the time, and she was probably paid in drugs. She's also addicted to speed, it seems like, throughout the documentary. And then there's a third layer, which is this documentary being made by who we later learn is, I guess, her boyfriend. And he, of course, is exploiting her completely. And I really say exploiting because later on she goes to visit her mother. It's very clear that the filmmaker needs an ending to his film, right? She did her thing, but there's no ending to this, you know? So they go back to Taiwan, where she's from.
Yeah, and they first meet her cousin.
And then her mom. And then, like, somebody anonymously, I'm saying that in quotes, calls and tells the mother about her being a pornographer. And it's pretty much accepted by fans of this documentary and others that the documentarian told the mother, so that there would be a filmic confrontation, which happens. Of course, this is like a traditional mother from Taiwan, Chinese. I might be, anyway. Needless to say, I don't know if. Needless to say, she is completely heartbroken, and there's a horrible confrontation that's secretly filmed, and it's completely used for the documentary.
Right.
And I'm assuming at the time the filmmaker was like, who could have done that, honey? That is so fucked up. Well, let's at least get it. And so there's always, and I don't think Annabelle got paid for the documentary. Yeah. Right. So there's multiple things going on, and in the end of it all, in the beginning of it all, it was like, you know, I don't necessarily think she got into pornography and sex work as really even as a kind of like, oh, all you bitches in the feminist studies department at UCLA, I'll show you. I mean, I think she got into it because she wanted extra money, like many women get into pornography. What I'm saying is, like, she later says, or she says initially, oh, I'm doing it to, like, show everyone their pussies and I'm the fucking real deal. But I think she got into pornography for the regular reasons people get into it. Also, drug addiction being a key figure. But, again, that's another episode, a hugely important documentary for Amelia and I. And it's incredible. It's one of those movies I feel like we can, like, put on anytime. For me, another example of that is the film Capturing the Friedmans. But we make, as Concave, Convex, Amelia and I made that second tape, and then this third tape was Victory Over Body. And these are all made pretty quick in terms of every couple months. I'd say every 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And Victory Over Body came about because the Larry Nassar trial, which this is all kind of based around, for the people that don't know, and you know, there's two documentaries, one on HBO, one on Netflix, all about how a sports medicine doctor who was at the Olympics, you know, gymnast, sports medicine doctor, and a hugely powerful, loved figure in gymnastics, had been sexually abusing his clients that were girls for years, including, you know, huge Olympic gymnasts, and he had been doing it in a kind of strange, non-traditional way, in the sense that it wasn't the traditional grooming and then he molests them in his house or at, you know, at the gym instead, although he did do it there too, but instead it's
like a process totally involving parents.
Well, and it's a process that's under the guise of, I'm doing needed medical work on you. So they would
practice which is seen as a technique which is legitimate if
right.
you know. if it's qualified.
Right, and because what he would do is he would essentially, these girls would have issues with their like legs being locked up or muscle spasms, the normal stuff. Most of the time I'm sure there's stretches or different kinds of like techniques. Instead he was doing
pelvic floor stretching.
Right, he was putting his ungloved hand into their vaginas and anuses,
into their cavities. Yeah.
Right, and he was fondling them. That's essentially what he was doing, but he was doing it in this confusing way where the girls thought they were just getting a medical examination or having a medical procedure. A lot of times the girls' parents would be sitting there, so it's even more confusing and strange to the girls. In a way, some of them realize they've been molested years later and they didn't even realize it, although it seems like all of them felt something was really wrong. So at the time, the victim impact statements were being live streamed and posted in huge chunks on various news sites. So we're talking like 45 minutes to multiple hours every day of each girl giving a victim impact statement to Nassar to be later sent to prison for life. And Amelia and I would sit and watch these statements just like in tears, and they're just complex and powerful, and we would also rip the footage audio wise to be used later on, right? And from that, like many of our stuff, it all begins, or some of our stuff, it all begins with first a concept and then samples. For me, and when I say samples, I mean voices talking about abuse or about a specific thing. For me, it all stems from Buyer's Market by Peter Sotos and the various Peter Sotos tracks that he did for White House, like Private, Public, and Birdseed, that are just samples only. Those type of tracks are something that affected me for the rest of my life and are hugely important to me. So for many of our projects, there's just sample only things where there's no synthesizer under them to kind of add a easy hand holding method of like, well, there's a synth and there's some reverb and it'll easy to get through it. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. I guess let's do this like Bed of Sex, where let's listen to a little bit of the first track and then we'll edit and put pieces.
Awesome. Yeah.
So that way we're not just kind of like, I'm not just talking with like no structure. So this first track is called I Am an Olympian. It's an intro and it's a pretty long track. It begins with kind of ambient piece and then ends with long samples from the Nassar track.
Thank you for being here. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Madeline, Madeline, Johnson, Johnson.
And how old are you today?
15.
And you're comfortable speaking?
Yes.
All right, very good. You seem very confident. So I want to hear those words nice and loud, all right?
All right.
Thank you.
The first time I went to see Nassar, I was 12 years old. Being the little gymnast I was beyond excited I had the opportunity to have Nassar as my doctor. He was spoken so highly of, as he was known as the gymnastics doctor. I was slowly injuring my back more and more with every practice, until one night my pain was so bad I couldn't even breathe without breaking down into tears. My parents were contemplating whether or not to take me to the ER, but my mom insisted she would just text Nassar to get me into an appointment, as this seemed like the most beneficial way to get treatment.
Okay, so we're back. So this is a very long track. I guess it's the longest track on the whole album because you have a couple minute intro, which is from what? I think it's a mix of two things, or it's just one thing?
It's probably two different layers of like a practice springboard, like their gyms, and probably like doing flips, and then also a like Olympic performance, like with like a rhythmic gymnastic performance.
Right. And then there's like this kind of beautiful, to me it's beautiful, piano kind of classical music ballad that comes on during one of the, I guess, is it some kind of a competition for gymnasts?
Yeah.
So it's like an old video, right? It's like a black and white kind of old, I don't know if it's an Olympic video, but something similar.
Yeah, I think it is one of the older ones.
And to me, I don't know, I love it because, of course, I'll never be a person who is disconnected to this hearing it for the first time, but to me, I hope that there's a kind of confusion when you're hearing it, of like trying to place what the sounds are from and what they are. And, they're kind of low fidelity in the sense that they feel like ancient and fuzzy, and things start to flow, and then you hear this piano music.
And then a crowd.
Right, and a crowd, and there's clapping, and I think there's this dislocated feeling, and then you get pushed into the majority of the track, like probably the next 9 minutes or so, or maybe more, which is the victim impact statements. And there's no backing track to hold your hand, there's nothing to fall back on. To me, it's almost like if you and this isn't even about the nature of the samples being like about sexual abuse. I mean, I don't know, I guess to me it gives a kind of doorway right at the start to people that don't want to do it. Like, it's like, do you want to participate? Do you want to listen to this? Do you not have what it takes, but like,
do you have the patience or
right,
empathy to sit there and
listen? And because it's from right off the back, there isn't a kind of easy entrance. And I mean, with power electronics, I like traditional PE in the various forms of that. In one form of that might be like you could call the A-Trax Morgue style, like a sample with lots of reverb and maybe delay underneath a buzzy or bassy synth tracks where it's like very dreamlike, which I love that style. So we use it at the end of the whole album Champion Production, which is a sample of Dominique I always say her name. Yes, Moscianu. But in this case, that was the choice to do the buyer's market way of just hitting you in the face with a bat kind of style. And we have listened to these samples many times. We know the girls, we know the voices, we know the stories, especially also because we used these samples in various forms in the live performances we've done. And I think generally, that's its own topic, but with the live version of Concave Convex, we've gotten to do that performance. We had, like, similar to the mattress on the floor breathing problem performances, there was a gymnast kind of victory over body flavor of Concave Convex performances. The ultimate one, I would say, we did in New York City. Thousands of Dead Gods booked it on your birthday in, was it 2018, I think?
Yeah.
Like one of the best shows we've ever played, just in terms of how fun it was.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So thank you to Justin and Matt for booking that show. And the way that the live shows usually worked was we would do a set amount of tracks, and then you would be on a table, right? Would it be at the end? Sometimes it would be a table, sometimes it wouldn't. I feel like crazy forgetting pieces of it, but it would be like we would have, what would it be? Like, how would the performance work?
It was like the part of the sample of that, like, idea behind Nassar placing towels between the girl and her mom in the room. Mm-hmm. And doing this very blatantly, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I guess like the creation of that performance really was like getting the audience involved, almost like a lot of it is like centered around and focused on this like parental involvement within
as kind of viewers watching this abuse happen,
but also like you're at fault, or you're the one to blame for your ignorance and your passivity.
Right, and the obsession with their daughters
bodies
as
and
right, the daughters' bodies as commodities and connections to a world of stardom as little mini gymnasts. And then also, of course, the audience members, whether they're the audience members in the courtroom during the Nassar hearings or the audience members at Olympic Games, the audience who were, I think we wanted the audience members of our performances to feel that way. And so in my, you guys can laugh because I'm like forgetting, hey, COVID sucks. It's like we haven't gotten to play like performances in so long, but we would do a thing where you'd be lying down, and I believe we would be playing the victim impact statements, and then at the same time, I would have a contact mic and a distortion pedal that would kind of turn on and off. So there would be like this raw, violent, harsh noise that would overtake the samples, and that harsh noise would kind of be a connection to me touching you as this kind of doctor patient. Right?
Right.
Is that how, I'm like literally asking, am I crazy? Is that how they worked?
Yes, that was it. Totally.
In terms of the culmination of the performances.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So those are some of my favorite ones.
Again, it's like, I love playing around with like how much an audience gets to be involved and subjected to something.
Mm-hmm.
And like mirroring that same like idea of passively watching something that
right
is wrong,
and similar to breathing problem, right, playing around with this idea of pointing a finger at the audience, and at the same time like the time wanting to push them away and to hate them. So let's move on to the second track. It's called Cross Twine. So, thoughts on this track?
The word cross twine is simply middle split position, like full splits. And so this whole track is about those videos I watched of parents doing what's called assisted stretching. And it's where the gymnast like lies on their back like on a flat bench, and then the legs are forced down past like the underside of the bench, and it's like this crazy manipulation to like achieve the perfect illusion of total body contortion.
Right.
And so it's also the introduction of kind of the idea of like perhaps what it would feel like for these parents to kind of look back and understand the impact of the entire sport and their training and the parents' involvement with achieving this perfection in their child, and perhaps that was like a contributing factor to an injury,
mm-hmm.
which led to this kind of need for physical therapy.
And to see Nassar.
Not only is it this intense like pain that these teenagers were going through. Their bodies were already at this point, which, you know,
puberty's painful.
Yeah, we don't even realize, like,
especially for girls in culture.
Yeah, none of these things are normal, and they all seem to end up in horrible back or leg or
it ruins their life.
Injuries.
Right, like a normal girl grows up. When I say I'm saying a girl that isn't in, say, gymnast or specific sports, and it's a painful puberty, painful growing up emotionally and physically, but at least they don't have like broken bones and sockets and joints and, you know, early onset diseases and stuff like that. You know what I mean? For the rest of their lives. So it's like it's almost like, you know, you could say this about all professional sports, but a couple, you know, from a young age, they destroy their bodies, and a couple go to the Olympics
out of pretty much sheer luck that they never had a serious injury in their
life.
Right,
it's a total crapshoot, and then maybe one or two get when they go to the Olympics, which I believe they can't get paid for. Or I don't know how, I could be wrong, but I know with college stuff they can't get paid for that. But they basically, you're hoping to get a sponsorship, and then like one person gets a sponsorship and is that like special person, and then everyone else is just kind of like, oh, maybe we'll do something in college, but probably then their bodies are too fucked anyway, and that's that. So it's a crazy sacrifice for all of these girls, but usually girls, and or at least that's what this album is specified, you know, is focused on. Sorry. Let's move on, and I'll just say in terms
talk about the we'll talk about the pictures later.
Well, I would just say like the sample, like I like the song a lot in the sense that it's like this simple loop of this. Again, this wasn't us with a drum machine. This was a sample we found from a documentary about gymnastics that we looped, and then there's some synth work over it. It's a pretty simple track, and I just love Amelia's vocals over it. So let's move on to song 3, The Girls I Loved Most. Okay, so this is another track that is almost to me like a sequel track in a way to Cross Twine, in the sense that musically also it uses a sample that Amelia found on YouTube that I believe is like different loops of gymnasts on like springboards, or maybe jumping off.
They're doing back handsprings.
And then like that's the sound, the booming kind of rhythmic, not rhythmic, but like the booming sound is their feet hitting the pads, right?
Yeah.
I love that. And then there's this kind of like vague, like buzzing. I don't even know if it's a synth or feedback or what, that kind of loops or moves linearly over it. And then again, Amelia's doing vocals, and this song similarly kind of about Cross Twine too, like similar lyrics, I guess, right?
Yeah, and there's like with it all of these songs that like lyrically are about what was like intensely listened to in the victim impact statements, And this one particularly, the girls I loved most is like referring to like Nassar's office was full of these photos of him with all of these famous gymnasts.
Right, that he had treated. Yeah,
so everyone, all these, nobody girls who hadn't, achieved any kind of success would go in there and be starstruck, and that was a part of this kind of grooming.
That was his grooming process, right?
Yeah, it's the first kind of thing that you would see that would make you
put your guard down a little bit, and your parents' guard down too. Like if, like famous gymnasts and athletes don't get molested.
Right. It's like the reasons why, like, it's the first kind of like entry into like why these girls would endure such torment, or like these are the reasons like why they would want to continue and to like achieve this perfection.
Right. And you're told also just implicitly, explicitly, you trust men, you trust doctors. These very masculine figures, even
like a hero.
Right. These are the men that will fix your broken female body, and you better just take what is given to you. That anyway, yeah. And they've been doing it since they were like 8 years old, right? They've been having their legs stretched, and so pain and being uncomfortable is like the MO. That's already part of this whole process. And that's what's interesting too, is finally in some of these documentaries that I like or dislike in different ways, I think one of them finally kind of said, like even without the sexual abuse, this is already abuse, because we're literally physically breaking these girls' bodies down for, I don't know, a industry of families to pay money to like really expensive gym memberships, right? It's a fucked up system no matter how you view it.
Right.
And I think another thing, just before, so I don't forget it, it's interesting the way even the court case, if you watched the entire court case, there was this female judge, and her name, I can't remember her name, but, and I don't think this is simple, but in the end, they kind of tried to tie things up with this ribbon of like, okay, you girls told your story to your monster, to Nassar, and now you're all stronger for it, and things are better, and you're all sisters, and you're all survivors, and it's okay. And I'm not 100% saying that this judge said you're all fixed and everything's great, but I think the way that the documentaries and the 2020 episodes had tried to sell it, and in truth, the way to get interviews from some of these girls also is to say we're selling it to where you're not victims, to where you're in control and you're telling your story. And I understand that you kind of have to sell things that way, but to me, and I realize I'm a man saying this, but to me, it's much darker. It's, again, the obvious thing of like these news stories taking their narratives of abuse narratives and repackaging them and selling them like all abuse narratives are, to just be consumed and thrown away. But then to kind of be convinced that you're all a sisterhood of people that are quitting this guy, and you're locking and throwing away the key, of which, by the way, Nassar, we all know, most likely thinks that these girls weren't abused, and that our culture and this courtroom told them they were abused. And that, just like when I was a kid and, the doctor looked at my penis when I was a little kid, that someone told me that was abuse, then I would believe I was a victim, which isn't true at all. Whenever a doctor looked at me and examined me, and I'm saying this again as a man, it was just like this thing that was like whatever. It wasn't even uncomfortable. It was just this kind of process. Clearly what he did to these girls is totally different. But like many child molesters of specific kinds, he views what he did as not harming them, and that culture and society and the justice system pervert their minds to make them think they were molested, which is just like the MO of many abusers. Sorry. But before I forgot about that, I just wanted to say, like, all these documentaries and even in court, the new kind of story is, and it's good these women shouldn't be ashamed. They should be able to talk about what happened, and unlike 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, where it was like the shameful thing of not even showing your face if you were abused. Women should be able to tell their story 100%. But I think some women might agree, I don't know if you do, that the way that they try to wrap things up in this neatly packaged bow is disingenuous at best and kind of perverse at worst. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Right.
Or
Yeah, I do. Totally.
but do you feel like, what I'm saying ultimately is, do you feel like in even all abuse kind of stories and narratives, there's a kind of need nowadays to place a positive spin that says we're stronger and we've beaten them and that we're all okay and things are better, and you telling your story on TV is a good thing for you? And I know it's not as simple as you think it's bad or good, but I don't know, does that kind of like simplistic thing?
Well, yeah, it's like, I guess you have to like think about what the goal is. Or
Right. And the goal in the court case is like for them for Nassar to get to hear the victims so they can have their voice.
Mm-hmm.
And he, will have shame or he won't have shame. Most likely doesn't really have any shame. He's just embarrassed for his family, most likely.
Yeah.
But I just think it's interesting that, I don't know, there's an kind of empowerment that goes back to even Annabelle Chong stuff where it's okay. You're not really a victim as long as, if you can, it used to be people would tell women like you're allowing yourself to be a victim. Like you can, so what if your husband beats you up? You can like just forget about it and not talk about it and move on. And it's good to talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there is a kind of simplistic fairy tale ending of everything's okay now that we told our story on TV?
For sure.
Like, is it a good thing?
No, because it's always a deception,
right?
From each and in every individual grasp over the impact of what has happened to you, and no one I don't think really does have like a goal in that case. If you're going out to speak about it, it's like not really. You have to place it in the mind of like, I guess it's like not even really for you.
Yeah, what's the end point? Yeah, who is it for? That's the great question.
Yeah, it's for the audience for those girls are hypothetically other athletes that happened to, but it's like what happened to them is so specific and probably
they have to just change. They have to, and hopefully they're doing it. They have to arrest the people that are in charge of all these gymnastics organizations. But like you said, who's the audience? And is the audience
it's like an echo chamber,
right? A bunch of housewives or husbands watching Larry Nassar get yelled at, and they hear the stories, and so to me, they get to cheer for them, similar to like they're again in front of this audience, and then, they're told like, don't worry, you guys, you're not disgusting voyeurs and weirdos for watching this, because in the end, they're sisters that are stronger for telling their story to you on TV. Do you get what I mean by that? Like the producers who make these shows, or even the lawyers and judges that create these victim impact statements, are telling the audiences, telling themselves that this will make things better. And I understand part of the thought process of, well, what are we going to do? Not have them tell their story, I was watching this thing about Richard Ramirez, the serial killer, and I didn't even really know this. He, of course, in L.A., killed and raped men and women, and just was like a brutal serial killer. But also, he molested a couple little girls and let them live. Okay. And the DA decided to drop the molestation charges because, hey, he's already going to get 14 death charges anyway, and he's going to, be on death row in LA. And, part of the reason that they didn't want to have those extra molestation, they called them the kiddie charges, by the way. Those are the words the cops used, was because, from what they say, they didn't want the girls to be re-victimized, not just on the stand, but it sounds like they didn't want the little girls to be known as molestation victims of Richard Ramirez. And I understand in some ways the desire for that, but it doesn't really sound like they asked the girls or the parents how they felt. More so was that there was these like sexist, misogynist cops that were like, oh, I wouldn't want my daughter to be viewed as some molestation victim, right?
Right. And
then that has to be channeled 25 years later into, well, it's okay. It's okay. We're not going to cover things up like we did in the past, but we're going to make it to where you're these strong women and you're better off. I think people want to think that these girls are okay and better off. Some of them might be like, well, it's going to be a hard road to recovery, but I think they've been used up and it's time to move on. And even for the court system, right? Nassar has been yelled at and then throw them away. Anyway, I know this is like a little off kilter thing, but I think it's an interesting conversation, and it's one that I think about all the time.
Yeah.
We're gonna move on to Victory Over Body, the fourth track, the middle of this entire album. Okay, so we're back. That was the song Victory Over Body, which is like, to many people, and including us, like one of the most disturbing songs we've ever made, any project, I think. Partially because it uses multiple samples, one of them being from a documentary of, gymnastics coaches doing the stretching routine that they do to stretch out the girls' legs. And again, this is like very much so just basically about, that's, the beginning of gymnastics. You've got to like get them to do the splits and be able to like stretch their legs out, right? I mean, it's like everyone does, including in cheerleaders. And there's videos of those stretchings that have gone like viral. And a lot of times what most commenters say is like, aside from the people that aren't part of those organizations or fields, they say like, oh, this is horrible. And then there's people that are like, oh no, this is just part of the way it works. It seems bad, but it's really not. And I think, so you've basically got a loop of that audio-wise, and then there's recordings of, I think it's me, I recorded myself like through like I played contact mic through an amp of just like smashing metal, and then recorded that on like a Zoom recorder or something. And then of course the track ends with this loop of after the stretching, right? Of like this girl being excited and happy, going, laughing. It's over. They're stoked, right?
Yeah.
It's like ends with this weird maniacal laugh of this child. And for me, whenever Amelia showed me this loop, it reminded me of Peter Sotos on some of his lesser known CDs has a set of loops where it'll be like kids, sometimes adults, sometimes news stories, or a term or some kind of phrase will weirdly loop over and over again. There's some like I think you might be able to find some of it on YouTube. And I definitely, for me at least, I was referencing that, the way that this loop can be this like otherworldly, disconnected thing while also being firmly planted in the conceptual ground. Can you talk about what that sample evokes? I mean, I know it's one of the ones you always talk about as being like really creepy to you.
Right. It's like really just like a frozen moment in time, whether that be anguish or relief, like laughter or crying. It's like stuck forever, like within you in this way.
Right. It's like a loop of this, you know, the first part of the track is this building of tension, you know, and then it ends with this kind of, I guess you'd call it like, well, like you just said, relief, or I don't know, this kind of, it's almost like allowing the listener to feel a little more calm.
It could be something that like is locked with you forever too. It could be relief, but it also very well could be like your, like what's imprisoned inside you and ever present in that way.
Yes, for sure. Okay, well, yeah, I feel like it's actually a false sense of relief. It's the same girl happy now that she doesn't have to do the stretches anymore with her coach, and now that's a loop. Even if you don't understand the language she's speaking, you understand she feels like this exaltation, this like calmness, you know?
For sure.
And it really...
And it mirrors like the reward that we give them in return for this suffering that we've made them endure for vanity's sake. And yeah, it's like
it's like this short little piece that says so much, I think, to both of us. And I don't know, I hope people get it. So now we're gonna listen to track 5, Tender Teaching Moments. Okay, we're back. That was Tender Teaching Moments. So again, this is a track I do vocals on. Mostly this album is Amelia's vocals, which I'm glad it's that way. But this is the one where it's like I did like a little drum loop. I don't know how to use rhythm machines really, but it's my own little way of doing basic rhythmic stuff. And Amelia and I were talking while listening to the song about how we weren't really sure what the lyrics were.
Right.
You were saying that I was reading something, I think, off the internet?
I think it's like a description of like an injury that someone had.
Right. And they went to him to try to get it fixed. I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
And then if...
There's also that crazy story. It could be that insane story that a particular victim had, that she had broken one of her, like the smaller bone in your leg.
Mm-hmm.
And she had been doing gymnastics on it for some time.
I think that's what this is.
Yeah, the coaches and everyone had been telling her to keep going and endure this pain. And Nassar had treated her and stuff. He did not inform her
that she was gonna
break. Her leg was broken.
Right.
For the sake of continuing to molest her.
Right.
And then she was in such a catastrophic amount of pain and because she was being treated by Nassar, they were like basically gaslighting her.
Right, they were saying like, "Oh, your leg's not broken, you're crazy."
And she begged her mother to go to the hospital to get an X-ray, and then they found out that her bone was like literally split in it, like down the middle, you know.
Oh God!
And she had been like doing all these flips on the injury that was literally like nailing her own bone into itself in like this insane way. So that's what you were reading. I'm pretty positive.
I think that's what it is. And
because
then
at the end it says like if it were any other athlete, like
they would have been screaming it.
Yeah.
And again, this is of course this amazing, perfect example of even out. Of course, she was being molested too, on top of being gaslit and told to participate in this sport with a fucking fractured leg and being tortured. And these children's bodies are meaningless to them outside of their object status or victim status. And then, of course, the final part of the song is samples from what's left of Larry Nassar's YouTube channel, where he would Tender Teaching Moments, which is the name of the track title, which is disgusting. And, you know, the channel was just pretty, you know, of course it didn't show anything obvious like abuse, but it was just him doing cheesy promo for himself to try to show different.
Really, it was him wanting to keep these videotapes of his clients.
Right, but I assume these are like exercises he did that are like
really
normal exercises. There's no abuse in these videos.
Right, but it's all the cameras, like angles towards like these bodies and stuff.
Right,
really
and just being able to like, you know, get the girls to walk around and you know, all this stuff is for him. It's all important. Even though if there's nothing obvious, I think to people like us that are aware of it, you know, you have to be aware of everything. So the next song is back. It's called Family Fracture. Let's listen to that.
I was 12 years old when I told my parents, when Larry rubs my feet, he uses his penis. My parents confronted him and he denied any such action. Due to complex details that I won't get into here, my parents chose to believe Larry Nassar over me. I spent the years between 12 and 18 avoiding and detaching from my family. To my father, someone who makes such heinous, false accusations is the worst type of person. His belief that I had lied seeped into the foundation of our relationship. Every time we got into a fight, he would tell me, "You need to apologize to Larry." I learned to ask for very little, as I wanted my parents to know that I didn't need them, just as I felt they didn't want me. It wasn't until I was about to leave for college, when my father again pulled the "you need to apologize" card, that I took another chance at clearing my name. I told him that I wasn't lying, and that Larry Nassar had indeed sexually abused me. Larry Nassar's actions had already caused me significant anguish, but I hurt worse as I watched my father realize what he had put me through. My father and I did our best to patch up our tattered relationship before he committed suicide in 2016. Admittedly, my father was experiencing debilitating health issues. But had he not had to bear the shame and self-loathing that stemmed from his defense of Larry Nassar, I believe he would have had a fighting chance for his life.
Larry Nassar wedged himself between myself and my family and used his leverage as my parents' trusted friend to pry us apart until we fractured. And fracture we did. My relationship with my mother is still marbled with pain, anger, and resentment. And for a long time, I told people that I did not have a family.
Okay, so that was Family Fracture, which is one of my favorite tracks. Do you want to talk about this song, Amelia?
Yeah, I would say it's like about how this abuse really kind of poisoned these relationships between the victims and their families.
Mm-hmm.
This sample that's at the end of this song is a girl named Kyle Stevens,
Mm-hmm.
and she's kind of the only one outside of gymnastics who was abused by Larry, who at least came forward. All of these athletes kind of have this sisterhood or whatever you want to call it between them, at least what we're, shown.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this lack of support and this alienation that happens, like, once this abuse happened to them,
Mm-hmm.
that made it impossible for the parents to really be there or understand because of their guilt. And
because this song, it's about two victims, but one's
Right.
victim, Kyle Stevens' father, killed himself once he realized that his daughter had been telling the truth about her abuse. She's a different kind of victim. She was actually molested by Nassar all the way when she was 6 years old, and it was done in the what you define like a traditional way, where he was a family friend that groomed her and molested her, like at home in Nassar's home, right?
right,
And
was a family friend of, like, her father's. So
right. And so what happened?
her father just, like,
Well, because she tried to tell him, I believe, when she was pretty young, even.
right, and, like, over and over again, her father refused to believe her.
Mhm.
And it broke their family up.
Because
And
he would say, you need to apologize to Larry for years, I think,
yeah,
right?
for years, over and over again, until
It came out in 2016.
yes, and then because it was obvious and
Right.
and in their face,
Right.
his father couldn't, or her father couldn't, deny it any longer, and killed himself because of
The guilt.
the guilt. Yeah.
And then it references another case that's, I think, actually, you hear the actual sample of that from the intro track, but what's that one about?
That one is the one where she says that after she came home, she called her mom and asked her if she had seen the news,
Mm-hmm.
and told her about what happened, that was what happened to her too. And she
Mhm.
was like, but I was in the same room as you, and couldn't swallow.
That she sat there while her daughter got abused.
Yeah, and she says, there was no way my mother could comfort me
Mm-hmm.
in that moment.
Right.
And that's really what, like, this song is like, or the lyrics at least, like,
Right.
behind it.
Everything's like fracturing and falling apart, and it becomes this indictment of like the parents in different ways, like the father who refuses to believe and is so disgusting that he tries to force his daughter to apologize and then kills himself, which is another way of not dealing with his daughter's pain, by the way.
Yeah.
He just, instead of being like, wow, I need to deal with this pain, he just rejects it again in a different way. And then in the other context, a mother wanting to not accept that she was there during the abuse. And I'm not even trying to say like, oh, the mom knew that it happened and should have stopped it. I think they were just as clueless as the girls to a certain degree, or more
they're
clueless,
victims
actually.
also.
Right, but I think it's hard for them to accept themselves as that. Okay, this is the final track. The song's called Champion Production. Okay, that was Champion Production. This song is a outro track of where it's Dominique Maricone talking about the... Okay, I said the name wrong. What is it? Dominique what?
Moscianu.
See? I'm sorry. I'm
It's
so
a Russian
sorry.
name.
Yes. So, some people might recognize that name, but she wasn't a part of the Nassar stuff, but she was a well-known young gymnast in the 90s. She was... got big and huge and helped promote Bella Caroli, and he has a gymnastics with his wife training camp. The Carolis, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they were from the Soviet Union, and they were known as like the biggest, baddest, champion production trainers, and they took Dominique under their wing back in the day. And in this, she doesn't talk about sexual abuse as much as she talks about, because she wasn't sexually abused by them. She talks about how her parents just gave her to these people essentially, and she was mentally and physically abused, and her whole life was basically created just so that she could become this little sports champion victory production. So we were just talking about that final Dominique Marciano track. And kind of you off when the song was playing, you were kind of talking about how her parents, who we know were Romanian immigrants, Dominique was born in America. Her parents were both gymnasts, and they had aspirations for her to be a gymnast too. We know,
Right.
and it was kind of like that was the plan. She was going to be the one to help the family, because it's a
Right.
family of immigrants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is how you survive. This is a way to survive, to be a professional athlete.
Yeah. It's almost like a totally different thing than these American girls, where like gymnastics is like this symbol of
Right.
wealth, or like,
Right. A lot of the times, and of course this is a generalization, but I think for American kids and parents, it's more of a middle to upper class sport, to either for them to a reflection of their good upbringing and that they're successful children.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, there's some that are lower class and need it and would love to be able to be successful, but I think very much so with gymnastics, it costs so much money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you need to have either the funds to pay for gyms and coaches, or in the case of someone like, I assume Dominique, she was able, her parents, and this is just me assuming, her parents were they probably put money into it, but after a while, people probably started seeing her, potential, and then they start sponsoring her,
Mm-hmm.
taking her
Yeah, and it's like this sad background that she has. Like her, I don't know if like many people know this, but like Dominique had a sister who was like adopted, who was born without legs. So it's kind of like this crazy thing because she was only able to like reconnect to her once
right, that was it. Like
she
had a
gymnast
sister
anymore.
right, like it's, what does it say, yeah, it says she revealed she has a younger sister who was born without legs and given up for adoption at the hospital. And her sister...
her mother, like they didn't even know that she was going to give birth to a baby without legs, and then...
Like, they just were like, it's done.
Yeah.
And she's actually an acrobat and aerialist.
Yeah, I know.
So she was a featured performer in the circus tour.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the point is that, like, the sister thing shows a lot that, like, with, you know, these are immigrant family members. She is this meal ticket and commodity, and she has this sister who literally they look at her and they're like, oh, she's a burden, and it kind of comes from that poor, you know, former Soviet Union kind of the thing of like, this is just a burden to us, get rid of them. And it just says so much, though. Still, she's like, I know she was emancipated at age 17. So I don't know. I think, like you said, it's just this another example at the end of how crazy things can get, how objectified and like awful things are. Like, you don't even have parents anymore. She has to be emancipated. And anyway, you know, by that time, the height of her gymnast era, she's raised by the Carolis who are just abusive anyway. So it's just like you're completely without any love or compassion in your life. You know, this is a track, if we're talking about the actual like makeup of the track, it's, you know, what I was saying, like an 8-track morgue kind of, like the sample is put through a reverb and delay, and there's like a synth under it that's kind of like creepy, and it's the kind of the polar opposite of the intro samples. But I think the end is important also because it kind of moves past the Nassar stuff and is an indictment on all of gymnastics and even sports in general. I think, you know, and then also you can also look at it like the way that this girl, Dominique, after she got out of the Olympics, she basically had to write a book and kind of sell herself as, I'm a post-gymnast. I'm a victim of abuse and neglect, and she has to rebrand herself as a kind of victim's advocate because that's what it's done to them. You know, that's like in the space of the media, some of these girls are able to pivot to become famous victims, you know?
Right. It's a different kind of success.
Right. And I'm not talking about this in the kind of like, I'm anti-PC and like people are like victims on social. That's not what we're saying. It's quite literally you become what's to some they call victims' rights advocates, but it's still about your career and the kind of placing yourself in this kind of capitalistic system of being a part of the media and political, like, you know, how do I fill up my year? I can talk on this many talk shows, I can have this book deal, or I can also, you know, maybe do stuff where I speak in front of Congress if there's some kind of thing about sports and exploitation in sports, and you have to kind of whittle out your own victims' rights, branding, marketing whole, you know, space. And it becomes, again, similar to what we were talking about before, this, I don't know, just this like corrupt thing altogether. Do these victims actually get help? I mean, is there a way for anyone to be healed? Right? I don't know the answer. That's, I guess, a very individualistic thing. People that are healed from their own abuse, if it's even possible. But makes me think about, like, of all things, Twin Peaks and the Twin Peaks Return series. Amelia and I are watching Twin Peaks again. Side note. But I was just thinking about the Twin Peaks season 3, whatever you want to call it. To me, one of the themes of season 3 is, spoilers for Twin Peaks. But in my opinion, season 3 starts to be about Cooper trying to go back in time to essentially stop Laura from ever being killed. Trying to stop this trauma. And in my opinion, I could be wrong, what we end up with at the end of the show is he's in this kind of side dimension where, Laura in the main world disappeared that night. She didn't not get killed and raped. She just disappeared. So there was still trauma in her family because she disappeared. And then Cooper and Diane go to this other version of reality where Laura, I don't know if you remember this, Amelia, but she's like a waitress.
Yeah, I do.
And then they get in the car and he takes her to her old house that isn't her house. And, Cooper's like, wait, what time is it? Like, where are we? And she's screaming. And to me, one of the main takeaways I got is Lynch and Frost were trying to say that, like, trauma can never be erased. It cannot be excised. There's no hero.
You can't even go back and try to resurrect or purify the past or what happened. It only leads you back to the same cycle and
Mm-hmm.
you experience the same momentum of
Right.
intensity.
Right. And that women and those who are victims of abuse and control, it's not about curing people. It's about trying to, and maybe this sounds like lofty, but create a space or culture where people can work through their pain and deal with their pain on an individualistic level. But I think this, going back to that court case where there's this judge who's trying to say you're all sisters now and you did it, you told your story. It's you told your story, which it is good to not, of course, hide abuse, but that's really just a step that's, you went in front of this guy that did these horrible things, who completely is a sociopath, a psychopath, who's never going to feel any kind of ounce of empathy except for himself and his family. And
there's no victory.
There is no victory. This isn't in the end they won because they told their story and it got out. And, I don't think, if I was talking to that judge, I don't think she'd go, well, of course I didn't think everything was perfect. But it was if you watch the case, it feels like she's trying to package things in this very easily digestible, media friendly way. Mm-hmm. That these girls are these victims who shared their statements, and things are going to be better. We're at least doing things. We're putting things in the right direction. And I sadly don't know how true that is. Of course, it's good that they were able to tell their truth and people were there to hear them. But I think that's beyond, it's less than the first step. The first step, it's also very specific. And I think it says a lot about the justice system and the media system and all of it being intertwined. And also Amelia and I's personal connections to these people's stories and the empathy we feel for them. I don't know.
Absolutely.
This is the end of the album, but I guess we could talk about we could talk about the art. We could talk about the release of it. Is there anything that you're thinking of that we haven't touched on?
I guess the photos,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them are weird photos I found on Etsy.
Oh yeah. We're talking about the booklet that comes with the tape or the LP.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge thing we should talk about. You are this Etsy, or not, they're this Instagram, Etsy, social media genius. You do this research about all these different things. We've been doing a lot of research for our sectioned project too, but you found all this stuff about all these photos and all this culture related to gymnasts.
Yeah, definitely.
And what kind of stuff would you find?
I would find for instance, Etsy would be like used like gymnastics uniforms for the performance. So those are like really expensive.
Custom.
Yes, so if they're used, they're discounted, and you can buy them from Latvia at a discount, and they're like probably like $200 versus like $500, you know, newly bought and like, you know, tailored. So,
but a lot of the
all of them are like, yeah, exactly. They're moms taking photos of their daughters like in the uniforms, and it's these.
They'd block their faces out. And they'd use these weird filters to block which is like smart. Oh yes, block your daughter's face out. Yeah. But it becomes this like strange otherworldly mask that they're wearing, which just makes it feel very dislocated and weird. And then of course the whole entire culture of sports, and you know, we could make a whole episode about it, but Instagram's a dark place. Let's just say
exactly. That. It's like a lot of the gymnastics like girls are like trying to be successful in the sport, but it's also like selling your daughter's brand as also perhaps like a model or whatever. So they're like these young teenage gymnasts, and their Instagrams are run by mom, and these accounts are public, but
they're like
they live
dead
off
accounts.
Of like,
there's like no photos or pictures, or if there are, it's like
the followers.
fake.
You mean?
Yes, the followers are. Let's say half of the followers are probably creeps.
For sure.
And the other half are like moms or probably moms, because I don't.
There's no control where those photos will be reposted.
Right, and I think what
the hashtags and stuff too are like a source of like
a rabbit hole these creeps can go down.
Yeah, totally.
And that's the thing, is that these women, these mothers, have to know that these photos are being used.
They don't turn off like comments or anything. So the comments are all there. You can read them, and they're liked and like, you know,
shared.
Because,
and so and it's like, you as a parent know what the social media is being used for, the audience that is the main audience, and you don't do anything about it, and that's really horrifying. They're promoting it and pushing it, and the avenues that goes down are like very deep and scary, and deal with, you know, it goes even beyond gymnasts and social media in general, and I think it even says thing about Instagram, because yes, Instagram takes down pornography or abuse or violence, I'm sure, but they leave up the stuff that's in the kind of gray area, and anybody can look, and I'm sure they have, to see weird, creepy, dead profiles without photos making strange comments on, you know, gymnasts, accounts that are run by their mothers. And no, these accounts aren't being deleted, and they're not being banned. And so it's really an indictment of the whole system of social media too. Yeah. What's up?
There's also the aspect of like YouTube also on top of this all, and just the same like
the same kind
about like
the access to
videos and.
Right. The access to all I can say is, if I had a kid, I don't know if I would even want them to be on social, like, in terms of, I'm not even talking about like, oh, you're 10, or can you have your own Facebook? I'm talking about, I don't really know how many pictures I would ever even post of them. Or if I would have a private profile and just have my friends being able to, like, you know, share family moments or whatever. But when you're completely just sharing these very specific things, and you know how it can look, you're definitely a part of the problem, for lack of a better term, and you're indulging in it and pushing it. So not only are you pushing that, but you're also pushing this physical abuse, this violence, and then you're also trying to become, you know, I think famous is too obvious of a word, but
well, right, because it's like these coaches or parents like on YouTube they make like this content of like, this is exactly how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like trying to show this as like it's like they are in this like position of like expertise on
Right.
these girls and like their bodies and stuff.
And and they want them to be successful, whatever that means. I'll leave it at that. I guess the final thing I could say is I felt like when we released the cassette version, we pretty much immediately wanted to do an LP version, and I'm glad that we did. That we had the chance to self-release it on LP, and I think there's people that appreciate it and love it. But I guess the ultimate thing, though, is like for us, I think if there was no audience, we'd still make these pieces for ourselves. They're a documentation of our connections and interests and I know it's a cliche, but obsessions. So I'm glad we got to share stuff about this album.
Me too.
And it should be on Spotify, the Victory Over Body by Concave Convex. It should be on Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff soon. It just got accepted onto it. But at the exact moment that we're recording this, it might only be on like Bandcamp. Like you have to go to breathingproblem.bandcamp.com and you can find the album for free on there. But, if you're listening to this a couple weeks later or whenever, it's worth checking Spotify too. Should be there. Thank you so much. I'm Rusty Kelly.
And I'm Amelia McKay.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
She wanted to show